sometimes in meetings, I'm always asking people, quite often asking people, what makes you feel really at anxiety, having a sense of anxiety in a meeting? When you start meetings or sessions with these fairly deep questions, people will quite often come up with something deep and it will send a signal to everyone else. It's okay to share emotions in this virtual space. And that's really what you're doing here with this icebreaker.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing that. I know, Marshall, you have a question.
The first thing is I just want to say thank you to these guys because we've had the privilege of working with them for quite a while now. And they've
Yeah.
done an amazing, amazing job. So the first thing I just want to say is thank you so much for just fantastic work that you're doing. And then a couple thoughts. One thought I had is the idea of differences. You see, another thing I love about that exercise is we begin to get into right versus wrong when people disagree. Well, this is right, this is wrong, this is better, this is worse. And what I love about this, it's a kind of also a fun way where people can express themselves, be different, and it's okay to be different.
Mm.
It's okay to be different. Steven said, if you're in an environment where people are going to kill you for being different, everybody's going to act like robots. Nobody's going to be different.
Yeah.
And this gives you the permission and kind of a fun way to actually be different than someone else and realize that differences are not inherently bad. In fact, through differences, we can learn things. So I just love that. I just love that. Can you think of a specific, go ahead. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that is such an important point because it's not just different from each other, it's different from the past. We opened up by saying the way that you got there isn't the way that you're going to move in the future. I forget exactly how you formulated it. I find when you do things like this, it gives you permission to do things differently as well, too. So it's different from any other meeting that you've had that day, probably. It's different from the typical expectations you have around a PowerPoint presentation and bullet points. So it really does pivot the mindset. It pivots the mindset towards the future, towards something new in a way that allows for trust to take place.
And what I would add to that is that differences are our strengths when people trust each other. So when you add trust to this, then that's the source of creativity and innovation, those differences. And so Jim, this and Mark, this whole approach is just trying to be intentional, deliberate, that we can't just assume trust. We can't take it for granted. We have to work on it on purpose, intentionally building this trust as a way that we lead, the way that we operate, so that we can collaborate. Because without trust, you don't really collaborate, you just coordinate. And we want to collaborate and bring out the best in what people have. That takes trust. And high trust collaboration, so much better. Going first, being vulnerable. I love the expression around vulnerability. Think of intimacy. We want to be intimacy, but spell it into, I-N-T-O, me, see. So you let people see into you. This is what you just did here is a little peek of some intimacy. Into me, see, letting people see that, but we're modeling the vulnerability, going first, and people tend to reciprocate and respond in kind, and that starts to create a virtuous upward cycle of trust and confidence, creating more. Now, this is a little thing, but those little things compound and they grow, and it becomes part of how we lead with trust.
I love what you're saying. Tell me, Steve, how contagious is trust?
Extremely contagious. By the way, in either direction, distrust
Okay, yeah.
is contagious.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of this low trust world, this existential crisis of trust you described, Martin, at the outset, is that tends to perpetuate itself. Because in a low trust world, everyone becomes a little bit more careful, cautious, guarded, because no one wants to get burned. People respond back more careful, cautious, guarded, and we can find ourselves perpetuating a vicious downward cycle of distrust and suspicion, creating more distrust and suspicion. So distrust is contagious, but so is trust. And trust and confidence can create more trust and confidence. It's David Novak, trusting first. People responding to that trust, they give it back to him. It becomes a virtuous upward spiral. And so, I think this is vital that we go first as leaders, because you could have two trustworthy people working together and yet no trust between them, even though they're both trustworthy, if neither person is willing to extend trust to the other. So in addition to being trustworthy, we need to be trusting to create trust. And when we create that trust, that can become a virtuous upward spiral. And we got to be deliberate about it, to Jim's point.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, coming up, I will claim that trust is experiencing an historic low. But is that really true? I think the answer from our guest will kind of surprise you. But before we get to the answer to that tricky statement, I think it's time for us to run the BCG Minute. Now, we ask Al Ramadan, the founder and CEO of Play Bigger and the co-author of Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Now, we ask him to share today's BCG Minute. Let's run it.
Hi, my name's Al Ramadan. I'm the CEO of Play Bigger, a category design firm based here in Silicon Valley. My question for Jim and Stephen on the M&M panel is, companies adopting hybrid working models are hesitant about very radical ways to maximize efficiency, such as asynchronous work. Yet we know that implementing best practices that revolve around transparency, trust, and asynchronous communication are the building blocks for creating a thriving remote work environment. What's your advice to managers watching who are finding it difficult to let go of old ways of working? How can managers learn to trust that their team is doing the work, even though they cannot physically see them? I really look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Who would like to start kicking this answer off? Because this is not a straightforward question, I have to say. Stephen, do you want to give it a stab?
Absolutely. I love Al's question because most of us are facing this. We have remote work, hybrid work, intentionally flexible work, and it's been accelerated by the pandemic. I think, again, this comes back to we have to be intentional and deliberate about the fact that we trust our people. And we're extending trust to them in a remote environment, in a hybrid environment, because, it's one thing if they're not there with us. It's another thing of, do we trust them and do they feel trusted? So if you up front say, look, as we work together, we trust you. But in that process of extending the trust, you do two other things. You clarify expectations and you agree upon a process of accountability to those expectations. So you're effectively building an agreement together around the trust that's being given. And then you can be very deliberate in saying, we trust you to do this in this new work environment. And we believe in you, but you're not just doing a blind trust without expectations or accountability. No, it's a smart trust because you built an agreement together with expectations, with accountability. If you do that well up front, you can become far more trusting than you might have thought was possible. And when people feel trusted, it brings out the very best in them. They'll perform better, they rise to the occasion, they develop new capabilities, and they reciprocate and give the trust back. And right now in this new work environment, where the workplace is changing in front of our eyes, more than ever before, here's an opportunity for leaders everywhere and for organizations to build trust faster with their people by demonstrating and showing and saying to their people, we trust you. And we are extending that trust to you in this new environment. And we built the agreements together that enable us to do this in a smart way. And this is a better way to lead in this new world of work.